Hello, everybody. This is your corner Späti for the week. This is your friend and host of the aforementioned podcast, Rob, speaking, here with Nick and Kieran. Say hello, boys.
Hello.
Hey.
And we are joined by returning guest, Tom McGath. Tom, what's up, man?
Great, I'm good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having
me. If you heard our last episode with Tom, you'll have some idea of what we're talking about today, and a topic I'm very excited about because I'm just excited about this movement that we're going to talk about today, the Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen campaign, the next phase in the
I thought we were talking
movement.
about off-season baseball here. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I would also be excited to talk about that, but we'll have to save that for another day. Is starting this week. By the time you hear it, on Friday, there will be the first day of collecting signatures. We're going to get into all of that, but first we have to talk about all of the political machinations, the rent sharks, and everything in between. I will say that we're going to talk more about, it's been almost 2 years since we've had you on, Tom. June 2019, I looked it up. So there's a lot that we have to cover that's happened since June 2019. If you want more of the background, go back and listen to the old episode. We cover a lot of, the state of housing today and what it means in regards to capitalism and politics. If anyone wants to give a quick shout out to, a point you want to make again that we covered on the last episode, I would just say I've been thinking a lot recently, considering, I don't know what they're calling it now, a K-shaped recovery or V-shaped recovery, but whatever depression we're in now, had me thinking about how much, we talked on the last episode about how so much of the housing stock, the public housing stock in Berlin was sold off after reunification, but how much 2008 and the debt crisis really accelerated that process. And so there's something, fitting that we're in a similar moment now, and the fight for a right to housing and a right to the city is heating up.
Yeah, I just to kind of, piggyback onto your thing before we go into the episode is that I don't think that I've thought about housing more in this last year with Corona and stuff like that, because of seeing then potential projects of projects is giving it too much credit, but the discussions of things like rent relief in certain countries that then was done, France had it for a brief amount of time,
Ireland as well.
Where?
Ireland.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. But yeah, the fact of that then that discussion ended up pretty upfront, I think kind of proved a lot of what we were talking about then last episode, kind of the theoretical basis behind the idea then of rents are rents, that they are these things that are just sucking you dry for a commodity that is pretty much just made up. And yeah, and I think that we saw that in Corona, and it's really been just kind of at the focal point of just acts, Berlin especially, then too, just with the housing situation here, new homelessness that then has become much more of a problem. Seeing it then when I saw friends, posting things like Kältebus, in Berlin and whatnot, and just kind of thinking to myself continuously of damn, this shit's all I don't want to sound dumb, damn, we live in a society, but it's just like access and lack of housing. It just seems like such a absurd thing in the society that we live in.
The only thing that I'll kind of referenced from the last time we had Tom on back in 2019 is the very dumb, convoluted joke of Greek Geralds that we arrived at, which was Gerald from Hey Arnold being Greek and also complimentary with your apartment. I can't really remember how we got to that point, but I'm going to eat a burger now, and then when I'm done eating that burger, you better believe I'm going to be bringing up Greek Gerald again.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this topic, I think, in times of crisis, it really tends to kind of draw out and show the contradictions not only between the haves and the have-nots, but between who has the power to essentially weather the pandemic, So money is always kind of a shielding factor in any kind of pandemic. And on top of that, it's okay if you're able to have a stable rent situation based on a stable income situation. You can just kind of hole up in your spot and hang out for the entire duration. I couldn't.
You can go to Cancun.
You can go to Cancun, yeah. And I think this is really kind of one of the big contradictions in the way that housing is treated at the moment, because, it is a commodity. It's a financialized commodity as well. My favorite thing, I think, in the last few months or so has just been following that Zentrale Immobilienausschuss newsletter, which is like the umbrella lobby organization for real estate in Germany at the federal level, constantly asking for demanding actually that the lockdowns be ended, because they understand at a deep level at some point that their work is not productive, and that they essentially have the trump card over everybody else. So if stores are not open, they can't make the money they need to kind of support their lifestyles. But it's very clear that it comes off of the back of people who are system relevant and that are essentially working in stores, essentially. Yeah.
I just kind of like to point to the beginning point, a part of your point that you made. That was a lot of me saying point. There was an interesting article that I saw that came up. I don't know if anyone else saw it. That was I believe it was in Bloomberg, of that how the who was affected by Corona. Like, that's the thing that's really funny coming from like a liberal paper, is that they don't have like the nuance sometimes. And they were talking about, look at all these cool people who are going and doing their home office in like Belize, or in spending $70,000 a month to live in the pandemic, but then kind of work from home while on vacation. And I think nothing stuck out to me more that point exactly than this massive class divide of I'm doing home office, but I'm chilling on the beach in my own private resort. And that became so normal for a very specific class of people. So just a little tidbit of that we do live in the dystopia that we are told is on the verge of happening. Those class divides are so extreme right now. I think that we can just blatantly see it in the pandemic, especially.
Yeah, we've alluded to it already. We are talking about, or we're going to end today talking about the Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen campaign, what you can do to help. That is collecting signatures to get a referendum on the ballot for this year's elections in Germany, and I mean, for those voters in Berlin. But I think we're going to spend the entire episode before that talking about how this is more than just a strictly electoral project. This is, I think that this campaign shows how broad this fight is, and how many aspects to life it touches, and how it can serve as a vehicle for perhaps something more than electoralism, something longer lasting. So I guess we should just go ahead and get into it. The political interest, I should say, which is the Mietendeckel law. So this happened, I think it hit the news pretty quickly after our last episode. I don't remember the exact date. Long story short, Berlin passed a Mietendeckel law. Tom, I'll let you explain the specifics, but I want to ask you basically what's in the law and how does it relate to the Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen campaign? What aren't all the problems done now?
No. So the Mietendeckel in English, it means rent cap. I think it was passed essentially in January 2020. Was it? No, I'm sorry. I think it was it July 2019, or was it? I'm mixing up my dates.
It came up in June or July, but it wasn't finalized until I think early 2020.
Yeah. So essentially,
if I remember correctly, the July thing was that that was the period in which they couldn't, all rent increases wouldn't count.
Yeah.
If it passed, wasn't it?
Yeah. This was the Stichtag, as they say in German, essentially the retroactive day where any rent raise after this essentially would not be valid anymore. So essentially, the rent cap is essentially a moratorium on rent raises, and it also sets an upper limit in terms of rent within the city as well. And it does this on not only, I think, mostly on a qualitative aspect as well. So it says essentially that if your building is built before 2014, it made the case to essentially exclude new builds, which I think is okay to somewhat incentivize construction, though maybe it could have been a bit more recent in terms of new builds. But it said, okay, if your building is built before 2014, there is an upper limit of, I think, €9.80 for rent per square meter, which works out to be something like, for the average apartment, I think around 500 or 600 or something like this. The lower limit is around 650, and says if you're within this area, it's fine. You're able to charge rent essentially based on different factors. So when your building was built, the essentially what your building has in terms of like heating, equipment, essentially where it's the condition of the apartment as well, if there's been any kind of renovations lately as well. So there's really kind of this, I would say, this Spielraum, or this area in between that the landlords can move within. And this was really seen as a radical step in the next, in terms of regulation of rent, because nothing has been done in terms of this at the state level in Germany before. So at the federal level, there is the rent break, which essentially says you can't raise rent more than 15% every 3 years, which is still outrageous if you think about it. But the rent cap said, okay, things are so bad right now, no more rent raises, and if you're above a certain amount, you have to actively lower the rent. And this is why it's been very controversial, not only on landlord Twitter and in the liberal press.
Oh God! We'll give the audience a minute to recover from those
anybody.
words.
I've been on
fallen and
TikTok.
I can't get up.
I've been on landlord TikTok. It's terrifying.
If you've been on, anytime you post Mietendeckel on Twitter, please use an asterisk. They will find you, and they will be.
This is like Späti on Dutch internet. Yeah,
they will find you, and they will. It'll be like Horst 5694 will be very angry at you. So essentially, right now, it's
Horst
been
5694 just not ready for my posting. Well, he just
He's had enough. So no, we've had essentially about a year of the Mietendeckel now, essentially. So I think the first kind of results are coming through, but I think in general, it's really something that we can celebrate. Long term, I don't think it's something that's sustainable, not only just because I wouldn't necessarily say artificial, but that there is quite a lot of power constellations against something like this. And I would not essentially want to trust the political will to enforce something like this. So for me, our saying is essentially that if you were able to take more apartments into public hand and make them nonprofit, this would be a much better power constellation rather than having a law that would have to be renewed every 5 years, and essentially you'd be at the arbitrariness of a coalition or the political will of the governing coalition.
Sorry, I just have one thing before we move away from Mietendeckel and stuff like that. Is and maybe Thomas would know a bit more about this. Is the terrifying rise of a thing now called Wunschmiete. Because for anyone who doesn't know,
I do not know about this, and it sounds horrible. Please elaborate.
Yeah,
it's also known as Schattenmiete or shadow rent. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's wish rent sounds a bit nicer than shadow rent. Shadow rent sounds like some Yu-Gi-Oh bullshit. So basically, any contracts that were given out, or like leases that were given out during the time of Mietendeckel, when Mietendeckel was being discussed, when it had been like the retroactive period happened, or even after, since it's passed, is now you get a thing on your lease being like, here's your warm rent including bills, here's your cold rent without bills, and here is the wish rent or Wunschmiete of like how much we will fucking charge you when our lobbies overturn the Mietendeckel rule. Which is like, why would you tell people that?
Because they've I think there was a recent report, I think maybe you posted this, Tom, of that then Deutsche Wohnen and whatever that lovely Swedish company is called have just pretty much said whatever the difference, Achilles, yeah, whatever that difference is of after the Mietendeckel, you have to pay back.
Yep.
Which is the most insane thing I've ever heard of. And then I was just like, well, in this country that like weirdly makes sense because Germany just loves this just loves punishing people for existing, it seems like.
I love the concept that fucking landlord Twitter is just going to collapse the economy overnight of just like calling in, I don't know, like I've seen people get like €300 reductions on their rent, and then like, okay, let's give them 2 years, like 24 times 300 just being asked for overnight. Fucking hell.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the kind of the sad parts of it. I mean, essentially, it really proves it's not really my thesis. I mean, it's any kind of housing activist or scholar's thesis that, landlords will literally do anything to make the most amount of money possible.
Instead of get a fucking job.
Except that. But the sad thing there, I think, is in general, like, not only is it really nefarious on the side of the landlords, but I think it's also not entirely legal. I mean, recently in Pankal, there was somebody in the left party I think it was probably in the parliament or something. They had a new essentially decision where they said this is illegal and you can't actually have this in the contract. I think Achilles said this. They said this to Achilles essentially. So I mean, imagine this in the U.S. It would be essentially being like if you had a work contract and your employer said, we're going to pay you the minimum wage, but if tomorrow the Supreme Court decides that the minimum wage is half that's what you really should be paid, and you'll owe us money. Actually,
the U.S. would totally do that though. So you're making a scenario that could totally exist in the U.S.
But I love the implication, which again is like a capitalist logic, which is like laws are really like a quantum state. You don't really know what's going to be the law today, so it's really what we decide. That's more constant than political.
But like the reverse doesn't exist. So like when I got my lease for my apartment, there was no like, I don't know, Hassan Mita of just like, and here's what we'll fucking charge you if those fucking socialists get their way. God damn it. Like that wasn't in the lease of like what my rent would be lowered to. I
hope in
the Vuvuzela clause.
Yeah, my Vuvuzela Mita.
They should spell out everything they will do to you. It's like, if you try to stay in your apartment because you can't afford the rent 1 month, we will have a SWAT team kick down your door. And like next bullet point, it's like, we can have 1 or maybe even 2 helicopters outside flashing lights.
Yeah.
And
all these people look like a yeah. I know, you have to imagine that all these people look like David Guetta but sound like the Swedish Chef. Like that's an important part of all of this. The other thing that was very similar to this was like my own reduction letter, as well as like I know other people's reduction letters because I'm with one of these big companies. They're kind of like boilerplate letters. All just kind of ended after telling me like what my new rent would be. All ended with, but don't worry, we're fighting this every step of the way. And I'm like, again, why would you tell me this?
I want to come back to the big business and actually the legal situation, but I want to talk about the people who should be quote unquote fighting on our side, and that is the politicians. So I think it goes without saying that the parties against the Mietendeckel were the CDU, the FDP, who seem to really be taking it to heart, and the AfD. And the bill was passed by the Red-Red-Green coalition, which is the governing coalition of Berlin, which is the SPD, the Greens, and Die Linke. Now, in this coalition, there seems to be a range of opinions on what exactly the Mietendeckel is and what expropriation would be. Some see this as a step on the path to expropriation, and some think, well, that'll about do it. So I think maybe we should start with the SPD because I think there's probably the most to say here. They are the biggest party in the coalition, and they have some strong opinions about expropriation. Tom, take it away.
I mean, essentially, the SPD see expropriation as not productive. So their main argument is that not only could it cause kind of a knock-on effect of private real estate actors expecting this as kind of an exit strategy and saying, if worse goes to worse, the city will just expropriate us and pay market rates. On top of that, they see it as kind of a anti-investor climate as well, which this is something we can talk about later, but the SPD has begun to swing very far right in the past few months. It has a lot to do with their new their double candidates essentially. So Giffey and Saleh. Giffey was I think she was the Bundesminister for Familie, and I think it's like education and family or something like this. It's interesting how I really enjoy how the SPD really kind of parachutes people in for these roles. They're just kind of like, oh, your next step can be mayor of Berlin, essentially, and your ladder to chancellor if that ever happens. Essentially, they are taking a very kind of middle ground triangulation strategy, which is kind of par for course for social democrats in the nowadays. In terms of Enteignen, I think the current mayor probably said it best. They had their Parteitag or their Congress where they voted on it in 2019, and Michael Müller essentially said, when Rutsby Tahiri, who is one of our campaigners, announces the class war, we stand up and we say that's not our way. So, I think that really kind of summarizes what kind of politics the
Michael
SPD
Müller loves just like putting his foot in his mouth all the time. That's just his go-to thing is just saying stupid shit that he thinks is like good one-liners. I love it. I love him.
We definitely talked about his his other comments about
where he equated it to anti-Semitism. Yeah, we totally did talk about it.
We definitely did that. Yeah, maybe we've had a lot of new listeners since then. Maybe someone wants to give us a reminder of what Michael Müller said.
Well, I think this is probably one of the early things that they said, where they were just kind of trying to test the water in terms of focus group messaging.
What's a better way in Germany to do that?
That is definitely. Oh, I'm sorry, Thomas. That is 100% Michael Müller's purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the throw the spaghetti at the wall SPD candidate.
Was this a headline somewhere? No. Did it cause a shitstorm? No. Then okay, maybe we'll just kind of forget about it. But essentially, he made the argument that because there could be Jewish landlords in Israel that would be expropriated, it would be anti-Semitic. Which essentially kind of dooms any kind of anti-capitalism criticism, because it says, okay, forget about class dynamics or anything. It's all about where you come from that really matters, essentially.
Michael Müller, the true anti-Deutsch, mayor of Berlin.
What we're talking about, I think the SPD has refined their message a little bit. I have a quote here from the date of that Parteitag, from the very Franziska Giffey, Miss Giffey, who back then was not, I think at the moment she was in the running to be the mayoral candidate. Anyway, she was not yet the candidate.
She's mayor of Neukölln, isn't she? Or she was? She
used to be, yeah. At this, she's just a regular representative. Anyway, quote.
My former mayor, got to show respect.
Yeah. At that Parteitag, where it was voted down 137 to 97 votes, her quote said, "I don't want this to be like a message sent from Berlin to the rest of Germany. For me, a modern city is one that is for innovation, not expropriation."
This is really telling, because this is the thing I think a lot of people, the SPD kind of playing the "we're not radical" sort of thing, of this weird hope that Berlin is still a tech city that's never going to happen. Like, I don't know if anyone knows, but they're trying to turn Tegel into a literally called Tech Republic. The thing that's really
what?
Yeah, there's
explain to me what is a republic about that.
I don't know, but
they're going to do that thing they did in Utah, where they give them the ability to collect taxes and shit.
Guys, we have to follow the order on the notes. We're talking about the new Tesla plant in Brandenburg later in the episode. Stop jumping around.
Of course,
Edit it out.
No, but the thing is that Berlin is still trying to I think, actually, very weirdly enough, I'm never going to agree with Peter Thiel on anything else on this show ever again. But when Peter Thiel was asked, I think 5 years ago, if Berlin is like the next tech hub, and he said no, and he was very explicit about that. Corporate tax in Germany is just simply too high, that it won't keep tech in the city. It just won't exist. They'll go to like Estonia or wherever the hell else, or like Malta, maybe, who knows. But it's really funny because that, like, at least that's what I read from her answer on that, is that there's this weird hope still amongst a specific class of people in Germany, or in Berlin at least, that Berlin is going to become the Silicon Valley thing. And yes, like I said, Tegel is the stop is now called like City Tech Republic or something like that. They're really trying their absolute, like, they're giving like the last hurrah to make Berlin into a startup city that it can't become, because startups don't like German corporate tax law, which is like kind of good for us in that sense, I would say.
I can say two things about that, because I'm unfortunately in this space. People try to make they really try to make Silicon Alley like a thing, but like it's not really. But like, there's also like this weird assumption that like tech people in Berlin would not be left leaning, because my impression so far is they run the range of Greens to Die Linke, unless they're in fintech, in which case they're all psychos. But like,
then they're all FDP voters, yeah.
Yeah, then they're all FDP voters. Yeah, they are. It's just like Christian Lindner probably made N26 in a dream. But like,
well, I used to work there, so I can give you some stories. But anyways,
yes, let's not do that.
Bonus content.
The bonus definitely behind the paywall. It's this very strange thing of like, Germany is also just like way too diffuse, because even though Berlin is trying to do this, so is Hamburg. Like, so is like any other major city in this fucking country, because there's too many.
I think my early hypothesis of it was just that there was a Berlin discount, and this was something that was known for a very, very long time, that rents are cheap so you can afford to pay your workers less.
Yeah.
And that's changing. So I mean, it's like the SPD is really shooting themselves in the foot if they're like, okay, we don't really give...
Wer hat uns verraten is that lovely old German saying from, the German Civil War, or the German Revolution, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
But I mean, my problem with that is essentially that, of course, salaries have not kept up, but you're still getting these rich kind of in-movers that are coming to work for these companies that are scaling up, essentially. So, they're
Schwabians.
I think in terms of the startups, there is all kinds of class dynamics that are mirrored inside these companies. So, it's really like everything is kind of like a reproduction of dependency theory within different structures. So you have the people in customer service who are all very left-leaning, up to like the very low product managers. And when you get up to the mid-management C-level, they all have their own apartments, so it doesn't matter. So, you might be able to convince them to feel a bit moralistic about the situation, which I have done in the past. But that kind of ends at a certain point where the financial interests start to be threatened.
Speaking of that, the Greens. So, as I understand it, that they are a little split on this issue. They're not as bad as the SPD. There's some
about everything in their party currently.
It seems like the leadership is kind of closer to the SPD. Mietendeckel's good. Stop this expropriation talk. Whereas more of the voters are leaning closer to the expropriation, the Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen movement. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was really what happened on their party congress about 2 years ago, where they essentially, the voters of the people in the party voted, I think significantly over the majority for expropriation, but all of the people in the leadership positions were somewhat hesitant to give full-throated endorsements of it. And they've tried again to kind of, I think, straddle the gap between there. So we had some talks with them recently, and they've essentially, and unfortunately, been playing kind of the same tune since then, that there's not enough qualitative criteria for expropriation, which is interesting because there's a legal argument behind expropriation that's kind of anchored in the German Constitution. There isn't really much of a qualitative criteria for it in the German constitution. So it's interesting that they're arguing this. But they're saying that we, with the quantitative number of 3,000 apartments, are not actually distinguishing between good landlords and bad landlords, as if that's possible. But yeah.
Anything you want to say about Die Linke? As I understand it, they've been behind the Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen campaign. I mean, adding support. I mean, is there anything else about like the political situation or like what we should take, maybe a sign we should take from the political discussions? I mean, just what I want to add is like, maybe this is obvious to everybody, but like you can shift the political terrain with yourself. Maybe we forget that sometimes, but like you can scare the Greens and SPD into doing stuff that helps you. Maybe you can do it again. Sorry, but yeah, is there anything you wanted to add about Die Linke or anything else?
I mean, I think it's kind of, it's probably not cliche to say this, but I think that Die Linke generally has their ear closest to kind of like the pulse on the street movements, essentially. They're always very quick to take over kind of demands from grassroots movements, which I think is really great. I think sometimes there's a danger of them taking it a bit too far and seeing as making something that's their own that really came from kind of the streets. I think the danger there is somewhat of kind of disillusionment when it comes to people that are on the streets. But of course, you have to have these parties in the parliament that are actually able to appear there and make the case for stuff like this. But I think, it was interesting when they had the Europawahl or the European elections where they had a poster with our campaign on it, and it was just like, okay, what does that have to do with European elections? Don't get me wrong. I think they are part of the coalition. They're one of our partners. They are very active and they will be very active in collecting signatures as well. I think in general, though, it's great to have this, but I think, they really wouldn't have this if it wasn't for the support in the streets and the actual grassroots infrastructure that was already there, essentially. Yeah.
On just one quick note, I know that, going back to the Greens is my favorite topic currently in Germany right now. But I've noticed in these like social debates, if you will, that this has been something I've noticed from friends of mine and, people that I know. And for example, asking my flatmate who used to be a Green voter, I guess. Things like this are the things that once people, I think, are realizing what the Greens either stand for or are split amongst themselves with are something that, at least amongst younger people who I know, is something that's really been kind of like one of the major aspects that they've kind of been losing faith in this party, that they just kind of like voted because they wanted green politics. And I never really maybe it's just generational. Like maybe it's just in the sense too of like informed voters and this and that and that. But I think that the general misconception of the Greens automatically being a left-wing party is like slowly melting away the bigger the Greens get. And that we're seeing the Greens on this national level have this massive identity crisis that no one's really addressing in Germany. I mean, we do. Don't want to toot our own horn. But I feel that then, in a lot of German media, no one's hard enough on the Greens with how internally, I think that first on anything, and two, I think that's the perfect point that then in Berlin the Greens are split on it because the Greens in Berlin are quite left wing, but I find that very interesting in the sense that this could be an issue housing just in general, not even Enteignung, but housing, especially amongst younger people who live in the city who would have typically voted Green because of just the assumption, could be something that either radicalizes them in politics or, gets them in, not even radicalizing, that's too many steps forward, but getting them involved and realizing that this party that is just kind of accepted as this progressive entity in Germany without any question is actually coming into question the first time in their very long career, because they're actually very much on the cusp of becoming a national leader. Not even that they're just a big party. They could end up in a coalition in 4 different ways right now.
Well, I think, I would add one thing to that. I think
go for it.
There is a bit of a short memory, at least when it comes to younger generations. So the Greens were in a coalition with the SPD in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Gerhard Schröder. So they
only
also,
had but they were the smallest part of that, and they weren't very I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, the Greens in the Schröder coalition were shit in their own, way, but I think that they were small enough still to kind of fly under the radar,
Yeah, and we didn't really know about climate change, Now it's like, oh, we got to do something green.
They hadn't watched the final episode of Jim Henson's Dinosaurs, the sitcom where everyone's a dinosaur, where it talks about climate change.
Yeah, An Inconvenient Truth hadn't come out, man.
Yeah, it's different. I just had one thing to kind of talk about, which connects, I think, both Nick's point and Rob's discussion of just the various parties and what they're standing on, and how this is an issue for them. Nick is 100% right that the Greens are definitely not nationally united behind a message, because the Greens here in Berlin are more left wing. But I spent
Baden-Württemberg, baby.
I spent the weekend in the green Baden-Württemberg fucking manifesto, and Jesus Christ. But in general, it's also interesting that because we're running up now to 2 state elections in Germany, Baden-Württemberg and some place that's not incestuous enough to be Saarland.
Rheinland-Pfalz.
Yeah, whatever. I don't care.
Kind of should. You do a podcast about European politics.
Yeah, I'll do.
Let him do his bit.
Let
him do his bit.
But the thing is that this whole Mietendeckel is in every party's manifesto. It has really driven the conversation nationally, which leads to some very patronizing ass posturing from parties like SPD, Greens, and Volt. These kind of vague links, vague left kind of parties of a lot of I saw the same comment come up and again. Is that might be well and good for Berliners, but us here in Baden-Württemberg, we think rent situation is fine, and we definitely don't need to be doing any of this expropriation or even a Mietendeckel.
They're probably not wrong though, because no one's fucking moving to Baden-Württemberg, so you're not having the rent skyrocket within a couple year period.
Yeah,
doesn't mean that it shouldn't exist though,
Before the Mietendeckel, I believe Berlin was the fastest growing rents in anywhere in Europe. Not the highest, but certainly the fastest growing.
Number 1, baby.
At least for property, I think rent as well, but for property values, it was in the world the worst, actually. So it was 20% per year, something like this.
Worst, best, it's all perspective.
Best being shit.
Best return from my Riester renta,
Yeah, right.
But basically, you can go finish, Kieran.
No, I was just saying that it's pretty cool to see that this stuff that when I first arrived in this country seemed very local, Berlin politics. Still largest city in Germany or whatever, but is actually having an impact in both Baden-Württemberg and Rheinland-Pfalz. Rheinland-Pfalz seems like they're not even trying to dissuade the message, but I think there are people on the ground in Baden-Württemberg that are yeah, maybe this is cool, because Die Linke in Baden-Württemberg is supporting it. I can't imagine Stuttgart is necessarily super affordable to people who want to live in Stuttgart.
There's a huge Daimler factory in Stuttgart, but I'm sure they're not doing so great with the rent. But I think, I think this is an interesting point because, in general, this is something that goes into kind of the importance of these battles, and at least when it comes to legislative and electoral wins as well, because it kind of opens the door for what is possible at other local levels as well. So, I think it's really great to have Berlin as kind of a lodestar for the rest of the country as well, because it says, if you're able to have a broad coalition or people on the ground to force through stuff like this, anything is possible. It's really kind of this real existing, I hate to say socialism, but it's something that has been seen as a success and is working.
Yeah. I think that it's also something too, very much to give credit to Germans as maybe not Germans, but Germany, is that the thing that I think people do get the most involved with in this country are local politic. Like, I've never seen a group of people get so like involved in that since I moved to Berlin. Maybe it's a Berlin thing, maybe it's a Germany thing, but I think it's overwhelmingly like a Germany thing. And something like this movement, like the the Enteignung, Mietendeckel, all that, starting in the metropolitan city that then Berlin is, people sometimes have a problem with that. I don't really care. But the fact that this has then now been implemented within local politics all over Berlin, I would assume that then that means that then the people in other states are then also probably taking this question much more seriously then, right? Because Germans have a somewhat they care more about what's happening within their own city, I would say, than like, at least from my experience within the United States of, where I've lived and whatnot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've just been trying to like Deutsche Wohnen Co has just been like a big kind of eye opener for me, and just like I constantly tell any remotely left Irish friend about it, because Ireland's rent situation is particularly fucked. But it is just like, look what they're doing. Do this back home, please. Do it.
I mean, we're three Americans and someone from Ireland, all who live in Berlin, but like, there is a little embarrassing childlike wonder being like, oh, you can actually do things with politics if you get enough people.
Yeah, I know, right?
And I mean, you nailed it, Tom.
I feel so stupid here.
It's not like, there's like hostile parties, there's like supporting parties, there's even something like, but like, that's not, that is not, they are the mountains, not the tectonic plates shifting underneath it all. And like, when you realize that there's like, you can actually like, that there's something going on underneath the surface, it's a very good feeling. And I mean, Deutsche Wohnen Co. Enteignen is part of it, but there's housing organizations, there's people being organized in tons of different groups before the Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen campaign that have like fed into like a lot of this moment that we're in now. So just feels good.
For sure. I mean, I know I make this point in the article that I wrote, that essentially, we're really the product of a huge year-long, decade-long struggle for affordable rent and a livable city. Berlin for the longest time was seen as kind of a refuge, not only in West Germany, but I would also say across the world. Essentially, it was this kind of showpiece at the center of this ideological battle between East and West. So, Berlin had a lot of subsidies. They had a lot of social housing for years and years and years. Also, the population went down, so it was affordable. But at the same time, it was the city where you could have a good life, and you didn't need to make a lot of money. And because of that, this kind of radical politics really gave birth to itself, because you didn't have to work, Singapore, London hours in finance or something to get by. You could really, get by doing something that's really late in the production. So I think Berlin was actually, they had some like industrial stuff in the West that essentially was at the end of the productive line. So they were putting together stuff, but all the big companies left Berlin. So essentially, if you were working there, you weren't making a lot of money, but people were able to have this life where they could afford to live there. But also experiment in communal politics, experiment in different ownership situations as well. Berlin has over 200,000 apartments that are co-ops, so Genossenschaften. So, it's material basis for things that isn't necessarily possible in other cities, because it's been financialized for decades. But Berlin, it has this built-in resistance automatically to it, because people have been living away from this financial logic for decades, essentially.
I want to take that moment to transition a little bit. I want to come back to the legal and how scared the big housing companies are. But the other big thing, I don't know if it's the biggest thing, but it's certainly something that happened in the news, in housing news, other than Mietendeckel, which is the eviction of squats, of community bars, of these kinds of solidarity locations. The biggest is probably the Liebig 34 squat. But Tom, I know you wrote about Syndikat in Neukölln. And this happened, I think Liebig was in October of last year and Syndikat in August of last year. And so I just feel like these cases illustrate exactly the point you're saying, where you have both of them are legacy, I believe, of the 90s in Berlin, right? Exactly what you're talking about, this like political, this political culture of Berlin that, from one point of view, people might crystallize as just that cultural thing of like, oh, it's about I don't know, it's about living in a squad and being a punk or something. When it's like, well, it's about like a right to like self, like agency and control over your housing situation. And I feel like it's certainly not a coincidence that the intensification that rents, I mean, we didn't even say it at the beginning, but there's one report that there's the Mietendeckel, but like and I gotta quote it exactly. So I just feel like there's certainly a confluence here where we have, the threat of rising rents in Berlin, and we have a crackdown, more evictions of these, I would say, certainly icons of the city, at a moment where there is a renewed movement for a right to housing and a right to the city. So yeah, Tom, you wrote about Syndikat, so anything you want to say on that, take it away.
So I think, what you're seeing essentially is the increased financialization of space in the city. So essentially this idea that, I think Raquel Rolnick writes about this. She used to be the former UN rapporteur on housing, of the corporate square in the city. So this idea that every single square meter can be quantified into its base unit, defined by euro and profitability. So it's interesting, in at least the Syndikat situation, you have a absentee landlord who is essentially Piers Global. And they had this great research done by the Corrective, I think is the collective, is this research collective essentially. And they found out that essentially, Piers Global, they're a famous real estate company in the UK. They also own the land that the British Embassy is on in Berlin. They had essentially bought the house and all of the apartments inside of it. And essentially they kicked out Syndikat without being willing to negotiate to extend their lease, essentially. Syndikat went through this whole entire maze of trying to find out who their actual landlord was. They couldn't reach them, essentially. So they found out essentially through Briefkastenfirma, which is essentially these kind of like corporate PO boxes in Luxembourg. That essentially was some guy in Denmark who was then essentially a Piers Global company, essentially. And then they went to London and they protested there. But it really shows how easy it is to essentially for foreign capital to come into these spaces. Not only foreign capital, but money in general, essentially, and capital can come into the city and quickly buy up these spaces and flip them. And this is where you're having this kind of, I think, this huge conflict where the global comes into contrast with the local situation. And this is where it's showing really one of the big contradictions in the financialization of housing, that, capital searches for a way, as David Harvey says, to extend kind of the geopolitical creep of itself by creating this corporate floor that's this single unit of rent, essentially. But this doesn't work at the local level because this is a bar that's owned by people. It's a different model of ownership. So Syndikat was a collective, cooperatively owned by a group of people. It's a neighborhood spot where people would come together. They were really important for the beginning of the Tempelhof referendum. People met there early to discuss actions, to come together and have signature drives as well. And it really shows, like how deep this penetration is getting into these neighborhoods, because it shows that these are all really vulnerable at the moment. So it's not necessarily the fact that the campaign itself has caused these spaces to become financialized. I think it's happening at the same time because the situation is so dire. It's like from the one day to the next, you really could be faced with the entire annihilation of your livelihood and your own your own social reproduction and the reproduction of your own lifestyle. It's not really, like, I would say, a coincidence that if you look at where gentrification happens, it destroys local businesses, destroys collectives like this. It replaces them with known things, like Starbucks, like chains, IKEA, whatever, because this is a known commodity. So not only, Raquel Rolnick also makes this argument in their book that like the corporate floor also destroys livelihoods because it searches for the maximum return on something that it knows, essentially. So this is really what we're facing, I think, in Berlin as well, because it's really a question of what the future is. Will we have these spaces where people are able to experiment with alternative lifestyles, to not always have to give in to the profit motive behind working at some crappy fintech or whatever,
Yes, drag fintech. Drag their asses. Yeah, that is upsetting. But also, I just want to say the point of like people who've come at us from the left being like, "Why are you talking about Europe? Are you pro EU?" It's like, no, we're not, because a cool place in Berlin was bought up by some fucking Danish asshole and like who obfuscated his wealth, and they had to go protest it in
Kieran,
London.
You're making up people who hate our show.
No, there are people who... Stop it. I'll tell you who it is afterwards. No one hates our show. You're right.
I mean,
but like
it's the rule 34 of like leftist Twitter. If you can think of it, there's somebody out there.
The reason that we do the EU is because we live here.
Yeah, I guess that's... But it's still like it is... It's a great example of how fucking interconnected this is.
No, of course.
I hate it.
Yeah.
That's actually, if you don't talk about something, it will go away.
So if I never talk about the EU again, it just disappears. Cool. Yep. All right. Done.
It's like Santa Claus. If you don't believe in it, they lose all their power.
This is just a like I'm only going to talk about everything outside of the European Union. Then let's go, baby. This is a Croatia podcast. Croatia's in the EU. Are they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Serbia podcast then.
Yeah, Serbia podcast. Let's go.
This is a Kosovo podcast, all right? Serbia doesn't exist anymore.
You can never enter Serbia now.
Wasn't planning on it anytime soon, but...
So, Tom, you mentioned the protests around Tempelhofer Feld. Are there any like movements that you want to that we should discuss in particular? Because there was a movement in Kreuzberg about a Google office coming in there, and ways to combat gentrification. This is something that's been going on in Berlin for quite a few years. I mentioned already the Elon Musk situation with the factory in Brandenburg. I don't know if anyone has anything to say about any of those topics. Please be my guest.
Well, I know I can at least mention Berlin versus Amazon, which I think is a really great initiative. So this is something being put together by the Tech Workers Coalition, and I think they're great. This is a nice struggle, just I think in general, to talk about like what the dynamic of Berlin is and what we think the future should be. I mean, it's we're talking earlier about how the SPD and also large parts of the Greens are really swinging towards this kind of Wirtschaft forum argument, or this economic argument where they're looking for jobs. But the real argument should be like what kind of jobs are these, and like why would we want to invite somebody who's ultimately extremely hostile to the city and its development, like into the heart of the city. They want to build this huge, massive tower in Friedrichshain right next to the East Side Mall, which is this monstrosity. But I think
what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Having these struggles really shows that the people in the city, and it's not just the native Berliners, but also the people that moved here. They came here for a reason, or they've lived here for a reason because they know what the lifestyle is like. I know I'm clearly like widely generalizing. There's a lot of people that struggle in Berlin that probably don't like the city. There's a lot of homeless people, but in general, I think there is a lifestyle in Berlin that is worth defending. It's a normative thing. So this is also why I get very alarmed when you read in the SPD Partei program, or the party program, that they put themselves on the side of the law and not the anarchists that were protesting Liebig 34 or whatever. And I think this is one of the ways where you can slow down kind of the spatial creep of capital and this kind of tech takeover of the city, where the local comes into contrast at this huge like I would say battle between the local and the global capital that is Amazon, that is Tesla. You can essentially quantify any space, but the people around it are what make the space special. So if you have this huge rebellious scene, at the end of the day, it just might not be worth it for these horrible toxic investors to come into the city and buy it up, because you make it that much difficult for them. And that's why this is so important.
I think what like the way I think about it, and the reason I talked about like the like punk culture at the beginning of this little segment, is that like it's a classic case of like reversing the flow of like the cultural and the political, right? Like people just assume, oh yeah, like the reason that techno was so big is because, well, they must have just had some creative people here, had some people thinking outside the box. When it's like what you want to keep isn't even necessarily like a certain cultural template. It's the right to like your own self-expression and like what exactly people. A lot of people who move here, a lot of people who think of Berlin, try to think about. And it's not like it's impossible to turn back the clock. I'm sorry if this hurts anyone's feelings. The 90s aren't coming back, but the 2020s will be like, the hope is that you have the like political infrastructure and the political organization to create your own 90s. It doesn't have to be the 90s, but it will feel like
good. Kieran and I can still make our new metal band.
Excellent.
It will be beautiful. It will attract people all around the world coming to the site of where the new metal was created in Berlin. If we have stable housing and can live a good life and express ourselves here. I believe in it.
The moment where new metal comes back.
The new metal is coming back. Me and Nick are going to make a band. And we're going to collab with. I know, but we're doing it here. We're doing Berlin style. We're going to collab with Tom so we can recreate System of a Down's Prison Song, but with like rent statistics in the city of Berlin.
I've been working on my growl. All right. I was a metalhead back in the day.
Yeah.
All right. This is like a little unknown fact about me. All right. For all of the Späti listeners out there in the world. All right. So I think people who like follow me on like Twitter or on Instagram know that then like I very much like death metal. And I used to record the demos for bands I was in, and I would have to record the vocals, which then meant that I got very good at doing death metal vocals.
Nice.
So
well, you know what
are you
it
gonna
is.
do something for us? You're just gonna bring it up now and
no, absolutely not. No, this is
like when people tell us like, oh, I have a really good story, and then they just don't tell it.
No, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna like. It's embarrassing. It genuinely like. If I was 16, I would have thought it was like the coolest shit in the face of the earth. Now, 28 years old, I think doing death metal vocals is not cool at all.
We will make it cool again by taking back the right to the
Yeah.
city, Nick. Don't worry.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, we're making the 90s. I feel like Berlin is a city that's willing to like make mini discs the normal way of like sharing music. I think we can do that.
Don't say
Feels
that.
like a mini disc kind of city.
I hate this. No.
Mini discs.
Yeah. For anyone looking for a death metal vocalist, or just kidding.
Tom, I wanted to ask you about something we skipped earlier, which is the legal situation. So I know there's a lot of argument back and forth over whether, you mentioned it already, that there's a clause in, I believe, the Berlin Constitution about expropriation. What is the legal argument back and forth? I know that the Red Red Green Coalition is waiting on a judgment from the federal court about the Mietendeckel law, and I think that's supposed to come this summer. What's the legal overview here? What could this all be for naught?
Do you mean the Mietendeckel or do you mean expropriation?
Well, sorry, it was a two-part question. So if you could answer both parts in turn, that would be ideal.
Yeah, sure. So So first with the Mietendeckel, I mean, this is also an argument that we make sometimes. That, it's because of the judicial kind of expropriation might be the better long-term solution. But essentially, the argument is a federal competency versus state competency argument. So the argument is that because the Mietpreisbremse, or the rent brake, essentially exists at the federal level, that Berlin does not have the competency at the state level to enact its own regulations. So German federalism is a bit different than American federalism because there is a clause in the German Constitution, I think it's Article 72 or 75 or something, that essentially says that there is like a Sperrwirkung, or like a block. If something is managed at the federal level, then you can't complement it or build on it at the state level, essentially. And the argument on the other side then is that because this is wildly complicated, you don't really know the details, but it's a very judicial argument. Essentially, that because the Mietpreisbremse, or the rent brake, is actually all about controlling private law contract, so like the amount of how much the rent can go up, versus the Mietendeckel, the rent cap, is controlling it at a public level, saying this is the price essentially that you can charge. These are two different legal fields essentially, so that they are not competing with each other essentially. So you can have them at the same time.
But then what about the legal basis for expropriation? What's the argument against it? Because we have a very scared big business community. And what are they going to invoke to try to, erase all of this?
So there's a lot of debate about the article in the Constitution that allows for socialization. So there are two articles, socialization versus expropriation. There are two articles in the German Constitution that allow for both, and they're separate articles. So Article 14 essentially is the property guarantee in the German Constitution that says you have a guarantee to your property. It also says that your property verpflichtet, essentially that it comes with responsibility. And there's, I think, in 14.2, or the second subsatz of the Article 14 essentially says that you can be expropriated if it serves essentially the common good. And based on that, they have rules on compensation that says it has to essentially be at market value to give you a proper compensation. The argument there is that Article 15 essentially is after Article 14. So Article 15 says that you're able to socialize parts of the economy, which was essentially the socialist clause in the new Constitution. Essentially, this is something actually the SPD was arguing very heavily for in 1949, when they said, "Okay, we're not so sure if this whole capitalism thing is going to work out because of Nazis. We need a clause in one of the articles that allows us to essentially directly intervene in a sector of the economy." And this was kind of a very smart judicial idea on our part, I would say, to say that, Article 15, it's never been used before. We're going to use this to say we expropriate all apartments over 3,000, apartment owners that have 3,000 apartments or more. So the two arguments are essentially saying that because Article 14 comes before Article 15, that Article 15 essentially depends on Article 14 in terms of the compensation. So that means essentially a lot of people are making the argument that the socialization has to serve the common good, and that there essentially can't be any other options or something. So a lot of the time when somebody expropriates a road or a farm or something to build a train or something, it serves the common good. And this is why it's okay. But the idea that you would expropriate corporations when you could just build new housing to help people, they see that as unconstitutional, that it's not actually matching this common good principle as well. Where we're actually saying that Article 15 is its own article, and that you don't need to have this common good clause. Essentially, there is no justification for that. That you can actually just say, we as the people decide to socialize a sector of the economy. In this case, it would be the landlords with 3,000 apartments or more. So there is this big disagreement between whether this is okay because it doesn't serve the common good, and the argument there would then be at the Supreme Court whether, if we had exhausted all their options, including building new housing, building social housing, before this, essentially. Which is kind of wild, because if you think about it, at the local level, you can make this argument for every single expropriation of a farmer to build a train track. It's like, just don't build a train, have somebody fly, take a taxi. I don't know. It's kind of absurd to think of it that way, where you get down into the granular level there and say, okay, actually, if you argue for this, then really nothing communal would be possible in terms of infrastructure or common held land, essentially. Which I think this is what they want, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we said already that the political parties themselves are really like, they can be, that is supposed to be the expression of the popular will. And like laws too, they're interpreted in different ways based on the popular will. And so like, I mean, I just think it's important to emphasize that like, if the power like to, realize the kind of city and politics we want is out there, if, we can grasp for it. I am wondering if the SPD will just say, yeah, we take that back, takesy backsies. We were JK back in 1949. We didn't really want to add that and, just ignore that.
You mean a party that's just like neoliberalized more than any other party in this country? Nah, could never happen.
Yeah, but it is an interesting kind of like, I just wonder, like, maybe particularly about the USOs or stuff like that. Like, how do you square this? Like,
they're not real. We don't.
I know, but like, how do you deal with that kind of like weird contradiction of what this party has become? Of just like, the SPD now is opposing probably one of the biggest things it's ever accomplished, and like that's lasted the test of time. It's like, how can you not be someone like what's his name? The one that everyone stand for a bit from the USOs.
Kevin
Kunert. Oh.
Yeah. How can you not be like, fuck? Like looking at this.
I think it's because it's either like in all seriousness with the SPD, it's either that you realize that you're not this like weird formation of like a neoliberal social democrat, like you're not like a Blairite, which is kind of like, remember, Germany's 10 years late to the party, if not longer, always. Like Olaf Scholz is from the right of his party and is being nominated as the chancellor candidate, I mean, of a party that cannot win the chancellorcy, like just won't happen. But still, like I think it's like one part the sense that then that a lot of people just either grow out of it and they're like, oh, this party is kind of sus, or they end up doing the kind of Kunert role, which is that they'll stay in as long as they can as like more or less a Marxist, and then check out and then kind of slowly start developing themselves as a actual politician. So, because like remember, Olaf Scholz was a Leninist.
I was about to say that's the typical kind of like trajectory of people in the SPD.
Very normal, yeah. It's super normal. The SPD is that like you're young, you're wild, young, wild, and free. You're kind of a Marxist, or in Olaf Scholz's case, explicitly called himself a Leninist on multiple occasions, and then now is very much a, I would say, right member of his own party. So
dude, I can say all my best friends are landlords, kind of. It's just upsetting, and most of it is driven by like, I don't know, a hatred of the fact that they get to call their youth wing party the Young Socialists. I'm just very upset about that. I want that title.
I would leave it there with the info section. We didn't talk about Elon Musk, but is there anything else we want to add before we tell you how you can get involved in this very exciting movement that you see us glowing about?
Wait, were we actually going to talk about Elon Musk?
Well, I don't know. He's kind of related.
Well, like
I was shoehorning it in.
Tesla factory shit.
Oh.
Yeah.
Expropriate Tesla.
Yeah. You're next, bitch.
God, I was reading about the Hyperloop again yesterday, and I was just like, this is such a fucking dumb. Anyway, the other thing that I think is kind of like
would it surprise you that one of the dumbest men on the face of the earth had a really stupid idea?
So the one thing that I found really upsetting is the company he made to make the Hyperloop possible, his like tunnel digging company, the boring company, actually is successful at like they have made digging tunnels a lot faster and more efficient, and then they just continue to use it for projects that are doomed from the start. It's really upsetting.
They actually use it to build the airport in Berlin.
No, but they build all these tunnels that are like meant to be for the Hyperloop, and then they turn out to be like, oh, the Hyperloop doesn't work, but these tunnels are too small for like a conventional subway. So I guess this is just a big sewer now or something. But so I guess the question that I'm not sure if it's even worth bringing up now. We probably have to bring it up when we actually go to talk about like Tesla and maybe even Amazon coming to Berlin. But like, how much of this stuff is happening in Brandenburg, like technically and legally, and like that as this weird loophole of like getting around Berlin's slightly more radical politics by just actually being like, no, we'll just put it in Brandenburg, but like right up on the border. So like, yeah, because like who controls Brandenburg at the moment? CDU?
I think it's SPD.
Yeah.
SPD, really?
Yeah.
Oh, fair enough.
Very much so.
Well, they're not any better, really. That's what the kind of the point of this podcast.
Yeah, of course.
But that's probably for a discussion when we actually do talk about like the campaign against the Gigafactory, as it's called. But like, I'm not mistaken, right? That's going to actually be technically in Brandenburg rather than
Berlin.
It's
right next to the airport.
Yeah.
It's on protected forest too, which is even crazier.
I had to cut down some of it
for fuck's sake. Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, my partner's from Brandenburg, so she complains about this. I mean, you're like hemorrhaging people to Berlin since decades, so I can understand it from the Brandenburg perspective, but yeah, it's unfortunate.
But it is this kind of like, I can totally see this becoming the tactic of like Berlin capital or German capital of just being like, all right, so Berlin government has been compromised by the Vuvuzelas. Let's just do everything on the Brandenburg border. Let's just like fuck up Potsdam and whatnot and Oranienburg.
Oh, yeah, Potsdam is another interesting situation. There's also a lot of Deutsche Wohnen apartments in Potsdam. I think they also have their own like local movements there as well. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah, good.
All right. We should talk about how you, the listener, can get involved and make this dream we've been talking about for the past hour plus a reality. So this episode is coming out on the 22nd. The 26th is the kickoff date for the second phase when the Deutsche Wohnen is aiming for, I believe, 240,000 signatures from Wahlberechtigt Berliners in order to get this on the ballot in September is the election, right? And almost as importantly, to keep making giant housing companies mad, to keep scaring political parties and everything else we talked about. So Tom, what if people want to get involved, what should they do? Where should they go? Help us lead these sheep to pasture.
So there are several different ways you can get involved. I think the easiest way is probably to find your local Kiez-Team if you speak German. There are essentially Kiez-Teams in every Bezirk or district, essentially, that is organizing all of the signature collections. So what they do is they're talking to establishments to set up places where people can go to and actually sign when they have time. They're doing signature drives, signature parties, events, essentially going onto the streets and talking to people. We're going through apartment houses and knocking on doors. So like go to the DWE, Enteignen.de website. And I think under Mitmachen or Sammler werden, essentially you can find where your Kiez-Team is. There's an address for it and you can write them directly and be like, yes, I would like to help. And they'll put you in a Telegram group and there are different meetings as well. If you are looking to just get information, you can join one of the new people meetings. I think there is one one next week, probably, I think on the 22nd or 26th. I'd have to look that up, but we can put that in later. and you can get introduced to the campaign. If you are not a German speaker, it's probably easier for you to get involved directly in the Right to the City working group. This is a group of non-German speakers who essentially have come together and decided, okay, because we actually can't sign and vote for the referendum, we'd like to help collect signatures. We'd like to do networking and organization with other migrant and immigrant groups around the city as well. And I think just being a source of actual labor for the campaign is probably the most important thing at the moment. So right now we have 1,000 people that have signed up to be collectors. If we're talking about 240,000 signatures, each one of those people would have to collect something like 240 signatures, which is quite a lot. So the more people, the better. I think in general, just doing your part in collecting signatures is a super great way to help. Talking to your neighbors, asking them to get involved, asking around your neighborhood if there's any place that might want to host signature lists, just for the people who come and sign
Späti, bookstore.
In general, Späti bookstore. I think it'll be important to have more kind of stuff like Spätis and bakeries because of the current pandemic as well. Less stuff is open essentially, but anyway, any of those ways are some really great ways to get involved. And I think it's a really exciting time to actually join the campaign because it's really just getting started in terms of tons of people on the street. So it's going to be really fun to see over the next couple months. Lots of demos to go to, demonstrations, and also in the lead up to the election in September, there's going to be a lot of actual canvassing happening. We're going to be doing telecampaigning as well. So it's a great way to practice your German as well. I don't know if you've ever gotten to political discussions in German, but it's a thing. Mm-hmm. It's fun. It's really fun if you go knocking on doors and talk to people in German as well. Sometimes they'll invite you inside during Corona times, maybe not, but it's happened to us in the past where they'll invite you inside and they give you tea and stuff. You can have a conversation with people. So not only is it a great way to, I think, do the footwork, it's also a great way to get to know your neighborhood. It's a great way to get more people involved. It's a great social activity. I think, it's really nice to just on a summer evening and also spring evening to go out,
it's warming up out there. It's warming up out there, everybody.
Go out and collect signatures on Tempelhoferfeld or something like this. It's really fun. Yeah.
I hope that we can make our enthusiasm contagious, because I do think if you were I don't know, maybe you heard about, I don't know, the Bernie campaign or something, all these campaigns that we want to do, it is so much more than already that the stated goal is a big deal. And I think that we can turn it into, hopefully, a vehicle for so much more. And the Right to the City group that Tom mentioned, there are many very good German speakers, so they are happy to translate for you. Groups like Berlin DSA will help with coordinating too. You can write them, you can write DSA, you can write us. I'll go out and collect signatures with you. We are all in this together. And you can be creative, you can put a list in the floor and at the front door and see if your neighbors sign it. You can, go to have it outside. You can set up a little stand outside. You can just talk to people in the park. There's some options, definitely.
I think you might need to talk to the police for that one, but if it's on a bike, I think a signature is a signature. I think that's the exception.
Wait, what are the rules actually?
If you set up a stand, it has to be you have to do an auto, or you have to register it with the police, essentially. But there are exceptions. If it's on a bike, then it's mobile, then it's okay.
Ooh,
so you can rent one of these Lastenträgerfahrrad or something, and
ask a small child to borrow his tricycle.
There's a guy in Neukölln who talks about how he ride around on a bicycle and hands out literature about how all immigrants should be allowed to vote on a megaphone.
Akim,
he's taking
yes, the king.
Yeah, we love him.
Spirit animal for the Right to the City working group.
Exactly, and it's similar to this. Something I learned by looking at all the policy positions in the state elections is something that's coming up in Germany this year is allowing immigrants who've been here for 5 years or longer to vote at the state level, regardless of whether they're citizens or not. So, Germans,
Kieran and
do
I-
vote for that.
Kieran and I have
Unleash my
finally-
power.
Yeah, wait, I can already vote here. But whatever, still, I want to power up.
You can't vote at the state
exactly.
level if you're an EU citizen.
No, exactly.
It's only in some
But Berlin, though, is
It's communal level.
Oh, yeah, okay. Fine.
And I should
Berlin,
clarify
Berlin's
that
a federal state, so yeah, it's different.
I believe,
Yeah, we only
Tom,
have
maybe
communal and
you-
EU, Nick.
Tom, maybe you can correct me. You have to have you have to be a German passport and angemeldet in Berlin to be a valid signature for this.
Yes, but
All right, who wants to marry me? And
sign anyways because we plan on
Yeah.
scandalizing the amount of invalid signatures. So
25% of Berlin, I believe, does not meet that criteria. I think that just might be without a German passport. Might be even more who are.
those are foreigners.
who are
Yeah,
non-committed.
25%.
So, but there's a lot you can do.
Do that. Unleash
also
my
get
power.
involved.
Yes, do. I think I'm just going to wear a big T-shirt that says "High rents ruined my country," and then just get that translated to German and just ask for people's signatures.
Hohe Miete hat mein Land zerstört.
Yeah, we'll put that on a T-shirt because I won't be able to communicate anything other than that, and just be
Yeah.
like Unterschriften bitte.
Yeah, the campaign welcomes all signatures, and I think that the legal requirement in terms of the to get on the ballot is 175,000, maybe 180,000. The campaign is
The exact
Do you know?
exact law is 7% of all
okay.
all eligible voters. Yeah, so it's about 170,000
oh.
people. Yeah.
The campaign has shot for 240,000, but why not? Why not more?
Yeah, let's go. Let's fucking go.
All right. Anything else that we want to add before we ask Tom where people can find more?
Jesus, Greek Gerald. I forgot to bring it up, but I'm bringing it back. This is a genuinely very exciting campaign, and it's good. It's very good. Support it if you can, if you have the time, if you're in Berlin, if you're a German, if you're someone who's just interested in rent and housing anywhere. That you listen to this, investigate this campaign, reach out to someone, ask how they did things, try to do it where you are. It's really fucking cool.
All right. So, Tom, I will have that article that you wrote that I mentioned in the description. I'll have links to Deutsche Wohnen and Enteignen. Is there anything else you want to, anything else coming up? Anything else you want to promote?
So
you have the floor.
Friday, we are actually having a demonstration, I think at 11:30 at Kopluster Tor. You're welcome to come by. I think we're having a press conference, and essentially it'll be like the launch for the second round of signature collection as well. So I can also send over some links in terms of what the event's coming up, but that'll be like the big, explosion.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Nice.
Actually, I don't know if I even mentioned, there's a window of 4 months that the signatures have to be collected in?
Yeah, it's 4 months.
So, the clock is ticking.
I think,
Are we going to make our future?
Dope.
per day it's something like almost 2,000 signatures, so it's a lot.
All right.
We got this.
Yeah,
We're all
seriously.
in this together, just like High School Musical says.
I am very optimistic. It is heartwarming to political barren wastelands of the places we're from, and let's do it. Why not?
It's fucking yep. Let's go.
Let's be legends.
We can make the 90s happen again.
Asterisk. New 90s.
New 90s.
New 90s. New 90s.
Less privatization.
New,
of-
better 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
Former
Yeah.
East Bloc countries.
It's the 90s. It's the 90s again, but history is alive. History is no longer over.
Fuck off, Fukuyama. We're done.
Yeah. And we all understand that Britney Spears was the right one in that relationship breakup. It's a different 90s.
We've learned.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Talk to you next week. Thank you, Tom, for coming on. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.